Okay, those are really big shoes to fill after Dr. Naushad Forbes' speech. But what he did for me was to set a stage, because there was a lot of discussion on startups, and it's great that my topic next is about startups. And while there is a lot happening and everybody is still discussing a lot about what, is it a technology startup or is it a innovation startup, there has really not been a definition of startup yet. World over, people are divided and have not kind of defined what this startup really means. We over the last 7 years have had a fair share of startups that we have dealt with, and what we've realized is that startup really is just a state of mind. It's not a state of company. It's not how old they are or how many, what's their capital or whether they're doing, of course, innovation being a key to these startups, but it's really not about whether they're tech or not, and it majorly depends on the outlook of the promoter as well. And I'm here to talk about some of those startups that we have dealt with in all these years and what we learned along the way. We are a design company, and we offer design services not specially targeted to the startups, but we, being startups right from the beginning, kind of got to interact a lot with these guys. But we had a lot of beginner's luck. We were lucky to work with large brands right in the beginning. And we started with all the enthusiasm. And one of the points Dr. Forbes said that in absence of mentors and in absence of more senior designers around you, you're ready to make your own mistakes. And you're ready to kind of learn from those mistakes. And learning we did. We did a lot of learning through these 7 years. We got lucky. We were working for brands attract brands, but we realized that we were working within the sphere of what was defined to us. A problem was given to us, and we were doing everything within that sphere to solve that problem. Of course, applying all the principles that was given to us, saying that, we will refute the premise of the problem, we will question everything, but still we were working within the sphere because we were working for large established conglomerates. And the thing about these large established conglomerates is that they have experts for everything. They'll have a data mining expert, and they'll have a product expert, and they'll have a research expert, an insight expert, and so on and so forth. So when, as a design company who was fairly young, we would come and present some radical ideas which were really like crazy, they would come and say, maybe this will not work. And then if you keep insisting and saying that, boss, no, try it, let's see whether it works or not, they'll say, okay, let's do a pilot. So in a way, it was great because it allowed us to kind of make those radical ideas, and we didn't have to take the onus of it. And basically, this was all honky-dory till we met our first startup. And we realized that they completely turned our world upside down, and they kind of were not the typical startups that we all are talking about just now, the IT, the apps. They were startups who were trying to do something innovative in an already existing traditional business, be it food packaging or be it manufacturing. They were looking at a traditional market and trying to find a need gap and trying to do something new in that particular area. So while they were not the traditional startups, but they were still in the traditional business, and they did not have the experience and the data to back all that we were trying to suggest, because there was no expert who was sitting there and who was telling us, boss, this will work, or boss, this will not work. And then that kind of scared us in the beginning, because as a small design company, we were scared to take those decisions because we had as much onus of the success of that startup as much as the promoter himself, because they were depending on us. We were the experts. The other learning or a realization, not such an happy realization, was that as a startup, when you are going out and reaching out to people, the people are reluctant to associate with you. They're not as readily available to kind of give you that service, be it prototyping, be it production, because this is not a large conglomerate who's ready to give you an order in lakhs. And they are not here to say that, okay, I'll do the sampling for free for you because, tomorrow you're going to, bring me larger business. So there aren't too many people who are ready to associate with startups. And we found, as a design company with ideas that we wanted to produce, this was the biggest hurdle we had. Anyways, this also meant that because they did not have this fleet of expertise on their team, they expected us to do everything. So, the social media, the marketing, the packaging, the product development, everything was the design companies or the design studios' basket of activities. And while we were not just the experts in the area that we operated in, we were expected to be experts through and through. Herein lies the catch. If a startup is trying to look for this so-called multidisciplinary design studio, it comes with costs, obviously. And that's something that the startups generally don't have, large, deep pockets to invest in a multidisciplinary design studio who has experts for everything. So it's like what I generally would recommend startups is that instead of going to so it's like if you have an ear infection, would you go to a diabetologist to get it cured? No, you would want to go to the ENT specialist and get your ears checked. It's like that. So why would a business whose core offering is, let's say, an app, or their main thing is a product, want to go to a multidisciplinary design company to get their work done? So what we generally would recommend is look for specialists who collaborate. Look for people who are actually being able to deliver that particular core objective of your business and are ready to collaborate with experts on the other related fields. So of course you could go to the design studio and get the work done, but it's an expensive affair. But what this kind of does is that the person who you're collaborating with becomes the design symphony conductor of your design process. He is the sutradhar of your design philosophy. So when this person collaborates with various people, the thread of your design philosophy, the big thought behind why you're doing what you're doing kind of doesn't get lost in the process. And you're also not, so as an entrepreneur, you're always, at one point becoming the director of your company, and at the next moment you're kind of sweeping your table so that it's clean. And entrepreneur himself is trying to do juggling many roles. So why would that person want to deal with 20 different people? So why not look for an agency who collaborates, who's ready to be that one-point contact, who's able to give you the complete spectrum of service? With that, we got the first startup that we dealt with. As Chef's Cook is a brand who wanted to kind of enter a traditional business of packaged food. And she was a chef and a photographer who saw a need gap. She wanted to talk to the amateur chefs who are looking at Master Chef and wanting to kind of do these experimental cooking at home. And she saw that Indian marinades was something which was absent in the shelves of India. And so she came to us. We, with our enthusiasm, started our design process, which has been very well illustrated in all our previous presentations. You do your interviews, you identify your need gaps, you observe, you do your visits, and we did all that. We had some great insights, and we did a great design. I mean, the design was accepted by the trade. It was not just accepted by the Indian market, they went international as well. And we took some serious risks. The packaging was more expensive than what it should have costed. So generally the rule of thumb is that you should not spend more than 7 to 8 or maximum 8 to 10% on your packaging. And we went ahead and said, boss, this is going to be on your shelf. You're not going to be doing any mainstream marketing. So the packaging has to do much more than just repackaging. So go ahead, spend a little more on your packaging, be a little bold. And they agreed because we were the experts, and they agreed. This is when we got the first root shock. We couldn't find a person to produce this for us in the quantities that we wanted, not because it was not technologically possible, but because they were just not able to produce this particular. So there was a die punch. If I was to go back to the packaging, it had a little punch on the front, and it kind of slid open and came out, and there was a story which got revealed as you kind of opened the pack. So we kind of, hyperventilated about the experience of using it and how people would open it. And the production just couldn't get that square right. I don't know if you could see it. It was really badly produced. While we fretted over this little detail, the startup couldn't wait any longer, and they said, boss, we're going to go hit the market. Let's see what happens. Maybe it will not look as premium as it should, but it will be in the market. And what we realized is that we are only as good as how we can produce our design. Designers can sit in a high chair and make really good-looking design on paper, but ultimately we need to understand the capacity of the production team that your client is going to associate with, and look at what quality they can produce ultimately. And mind you, this had never been a problem when we were working with larger brands. We'd never had a production problem because, the production team was always ready to experiment, ready to redo your activities, ready to prototype for you 1,000,000 times before they got it right. And that just doesn't happen in a startup situation. We kind of lost our ego in this process because we were sitting high and saying, you don't have good enough people to produce it. But that was the reality of the situation. The product hit the market. Interestingly enough, it did its job well. It started getting picked up by the people, and it kind of got its fair share of notice on the shelf. And the client came to us and said, now we want to change the packaging. We had just managed to stabilize. We just managed to stabilize the production, and they said, we want to change the packaging. This would have been a very tedious process if we were not as involved in the business as we were, because we understood where he was coming from. And what we realized is that the packaging had done its job. It had got the eyes on the shelf. It had got the attention it needed, and now it needed to do something else. It had moved on, and this was our next, realization that startups, the brief, their needs evolve very rapidly, and while you are doing these solutions, one of the very interesting questions that somebody asked was that how does design, keep up with the ever-changing by the time you have produced something, the whole scenario has changed, and how do you actually keep up with it is by being future ready. I would say that your research has, or your groundwork has already accounted for this eventuality that you might need to change. And while we did not do it in this, and this was a great learning, but all the consecutive startups that we worked with, we designed with the mindset of it being an iterative design process and nothing being final. So while the brief changed, so I'm just repeating my point. This was like startups are iterative. The packaging went through 3 rounds in about 2 years and finally settled on a very conventional, because after it had done its job of being noticed, etc., it finally settled on the most economic, most effective method of selling. And of course, it went on to make many more products. One of the things, while startups grow and design can boast a lot about how it has contributed in its success, we also need to, rightly so, because we say that people picked up the product because the design was great. But there are many factors which make a startup a success or not. And this is another example of what didn't go well. So we did everything exactly the same. In fact, we were wiser and we were smarter after doing one brand, which was a startup, and we did not even repeat our mistakes. The packaging got all the awards that it deserved, and in fact, one of the anecdotal success of this was that it got a shelf space in a very snooty retail scenario where, generally brands, they were reluctant to take up new brands because it was a very high market supermarket, but it got its shelf space. But the much-awaited investor never came on board, and the product died its silent death. So what I want to kind of point out here is that it's a big fat gamble, even as a design company, and design can't take the complete onus Hridesh was just talking about how it is the cart and the horse scenario where the design is the cart and there is a whole system, the horse which is pulling it. If you put the cart in front of the horse, it's just not going to work. So design is actually a part of the system, and it cannot take the complete onus of the success or failure of any startup. Dr. Forbes also mentioned a very interesting set of startups which I'm going to talk about now, is the new breed of startups of second-generation entrepreneurs. So around 2014, we had an opportunity to meet this kind of a startup. It wasn't really a startup. He was a small-time manufacturer, more like an assembly unit, and they came to us for design service. And we were overwhelmed. We were like, if a small manufacturer can see value in design, then design must have surely arrived. We are there. A small manufacturer is thinking that a design can make change. But there was a catch. And the catch was that this was a second-generation entrepreneur trying to convince his dad to change the way they were manufacturing their products and how they were, growing. And in traditional sense, this might not be a startup, I agree, but it was almost like the family was the investor in this whole venture of his, and he was answerable to them. And this new generation entrepreneur wanted to take this business into a new direction. And he didn't want to be just a manufacturer, he wanted to be more than that. And this is where our creative struggle started. He was expecting us to convince his father to kind of invest in design. And we had meetings after meetings about how design can make an impact and how it can make all the difference and how it will be the differentiating factor for your competition, but nothing convinced this investor. Till, in one of the meetings, Nitin, sitting right here, he was the designer on this, and he looked at a machine. We were on the shop floor, and he looked at one of the machines and says, sir, you can make this machine using 2 pulleys instead of 1. And everything halted. And so let me introduce you. This was a gym manufacturing guy. He was assembling and manufacturing gym equipment. So he looked at it and said, you can make this in 2 pulleys. So the father stopped in his track and said, how? And with a quick sketch, we kind of sold this idea to him. The idea kind of sat so well in his mind that he saw the benefit not just in terms of reducing the cost, but making the machine more stable, more aesthetically pleasing, obviously. And that's when we finally got to get on board with these guys after almost 6 months of convincing them to kind of invest in design. And then there was no looking back. We obviously made a set of so-called stylized machines for them, which is great. But that's not what design should actually do, right? This is just the first step of what design should actually do. What we did was to kind of standardize their processes. So their raw material, their number of components, we kind of standardized. So this brought down their order to delivery time drastically, and that kind of was a great benefit to their business. Their delivery time was increased. So overall, what we did was that we removed the customized processes, because there were almost about 40 sets of machines that they were manufacturing, and we kind of reduced the number of customization they needed to do for each machine. This in turn reduced their inventory and their margin of error, because they were producing their raw material, or so to say, the things that they assembled in larger quantities. So they were doing that job much more efficiently. And then ultimately we kind of reduced the cost. But what we realized that without a process in place, the manufacturing team was always in the discovery mode. There was new problem every time that they were trying to make one of these machines. And you know, when we went into the prototype stage, we realized that their team, their complete fabrication team, did not know how to read drawings. And we were speechless. We were like, you know, we discovered that the team was not equipped to take forward the design and implement the process that it would truly make it efficient. There was still lots of verbal communication. There was still lots of verbal instructions that they were following. And they did not understand, the team that was actually producing this did not understand the necessity of a process in place completely. And we kind of got them on board. We taught them how to read drawings. We trained their manufacturing team. And this completely eliminated their verbal instructions. And there was no loss in translation. It was easier to train teams, newer teams, to join and take the work forward. And this was one of the learnings, that we had to get all the stakeholders on board before we actually implement any design. We also, oh, there is no video happening. Okay. So we also looked at their service model. And because they were a manufacturing unit, we kind of looked at how they are, how the post-sales was happening. And because we had reduced back when we were designing, we had reduced the number of components, which meant that we had reduced the wear and tear, and ultimately we had reduced the maintenance and the replacement. So, you know, how happy the first generation businessman was. We were looking at a complete, so he was looking at design as just something that was going to style and revamp his machines and his new set of designs. And here we were looking at how their service model was, training their teams, and we had a really happy investor, to tell you the truth. But you know, we are a design company. We are quite a restless lot, so we didn't stop there. And you know, during our user research stage, we had kind of got a lot of insights when we were actually going and talking to these people who gym and people who kind of go and, you know, rough it out. And we were sitting on these really great insights, and we were waiting for this moment to go and tell these insights to them. And we didn't want to do that to a person who was reluctant to, first of all, take our services. So we were holding on to these insights. And now with all this training and service model and everything, they had kind of gained enough confidence in us. And so, you know, they say that gold is at the bottom of the pyramid, and they were kind of sitting on this bottom of the pyramid. We said, why not own them? Why not actually talk to these people? Why do you want to sell your machines? And why don't you kind of maximize the benefit of designing these really stylized machines and start using them as a brand in itself? And while doing the consumer research, we had discovered that these akhadas and gym kind of areas, it was actually an evening hangout place for these guys. It was a place where most of the, I don't know how to say this without sounding judgmental, but most of the negative, you know, negative energies was kind of channelized, and people were like gymming and, you know, taking their frustration out. So they had lots of local leaders participating in these gyms. And these local leaders obviously could be thought leaders and decision makers. So we said, why not, you know, really talk to them? They were hungry for communication. You had a captive audience. You start your own line of gyms. And believe it or not, they agreed. They agreed to kind of strategically look at how they were selling their machines, and instead of being a third-party manufacturer and selling it as this thing, they started their own set of gyms. which was targeted at the bottom of the pyramid, and it was called Pehelwan. It was inspired by the spirit of Taleems in India. I don't know if you guys know about where the Pehelwans kind of do riyaz or whatever. And then we said, don't stop there. You kind of go ahead and do diet counseling. So, you know, these gyms kind of recommend you to have this really large weight rings, and you have to buy these really big bags of them. So they're fairly expensive, you know, to invest in. So we said, why don't you give them by the glass? You know, you start selling them by the glass. And again, another idea that they kind of took, and it perfectly fit the pocket size of the TG that we were talking to. We said that it's time to give back to the society. People are looking at these gyms as a channelization of their frustration and anger. Look at this as a social platform, and which still they did. So as going ahead, you know, who knows, they will grow into a gym apparel brand, I don't know, and maybe like Patanjali have a range of you know, vests. But what I really wanted to say was that we started with fitness has nothing to do with how fat your pockets was. And they agreed on this motto, and we were able to kind of go from no design and touch upon every aspect of the business. You know, the father was operating as a gym manufacturer for 25 years with no design at all. We were engaged for design as styling. We were engaged for just making their machines look good. We looked at their process. We looked at how they were manufacturing, how they were actually making their processes efficient. And then we actually managed to influence the strategy and the direction in which the brand was going. So in conclusion, I would like to say is that if given an opportunity, design can really, really influence the complete direction in which a business can go, however given the opportunity, and however given the trust and and it is more of a collaborative process. So before the bell rings, I am going to conclude. Any questions?
Just one short question about like the cost that you mentioned, right? Most startups can't afford design services. So it's not just a question to you, but like any other design firms out here. So have you ever considered, has any company offered you like somewhat like equity in terms of like some cash, some equity, so that in the company, so that you're clearly vested and doesn't cost, I mean, you can get the cost back. I mean, you mentioned it's a gamble, right? So, and then maybe probably buyback, as in they can buy back the equity when you get the full cost plus some premium?
In fact, with the Pehelwan, we are toying with the idea of a similar engagement with Pehelwan, because it's an idea and concept, and because it was such a co-created concept, we are really looking at doing this as a collaborative venture. However, having said that, it's a scary business, you know. We are not investors, we don't look at portfolios, and we don't have that kind of, bandwidth to kind of look at what. So we've got this options a lot of times, but we've looked at different financial models to engage with startups, which is not typically how you would engage with a large conglomerate, which is fair to everybody and it's more affordable. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you.